the culture is different from the Philippines to here. The opportunities, and I wish that what we have here is almost the same as what they can give there. If they have the same or equal opportunities that we have here in the States and in the Philippines, people in the Philippines will be all successful.
Yeah.
All of them were like graduates of college, and they were just working on a supermarket or grocery store.
Yeah.
And then here, you can finish in high school, have your high school diploma, and you can work in the supermarket with a high-ranking job, right? Position.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, isn't that so weird?
Yeah.
And when we arrived here, most of the Filipino teachers have masters, and we were like starting at the beginning.
Right.
It's okay, because here it's different. So yeah, it's totally different.
Lonnie and I were actually talking about this, how they're recruiting teachers from the Philippines.
Yes.
Was that something that you had in mind when you were in the Philippines? You're like, I want to go to the States. Or was it like, oh, here's an opportunity, let's go?
At the beginning, I was directly hired as a teacher in Harvest Prep Academy in Yuma. That chartered school directly hired me from the Philippines. When I arrived here, it's a totally different culture. But the language is the same.
Really?
Because they are more of Spanish, the language. So I can understand them. And students will call me maestra. I was like, that sounds familiar. Same thing in the Philippines. And so my students will ask me, do you understand Spanish? Because, they can say something. It's like, don't ever say bad words in Spanish, because I know those bad words are the same thing as ours. They were like, really, teacher? It's like, yeah, it's the same thing. And then when they're talking about their grandparents, that's the time that I feel like I'm at home, because they will talk about their nana and their tata. Wait a minute. That's how I call my grandparents, nana and tata.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, you know what? My tío and my tía? I was like, wait, that's how I call my uncle and my aunties, tío and tía.
Yeah.
They were like, really? Yeah, especially in the provinces of the Philippines, they will call you tío, tía. So they were like, wow, that blows their mind. I was like, our culture is almost the same. Oh, yeah. And then they offered me menudo.
Different style.
I was like, oh my gosh, please don't offer me that. They were like, why? It's our common food every day.
They're like, let's see if she's going to eat this.
Yeah, they were like,
okay.
let's see if you say something. It's like, no, it's the same thing. Mexican occasions, they will offer like desserts, delicacies. I remember when I arrived here in Somerton, we were on a training, and I came from the Philippines and I have polvorones.
Yes.
I brought that to the team of Mexicans. They were like, oh, I have one too. The same thing. It's like, oh my gosh, why did I bring the same thing? They were like, oh, we have polvorones too. I was like, oh my gosh.
I didn't know they had polvorones as well.
Yeah, we have the same polvorones in the Philippines.
Yeah.
We just call it polvoron, but it's the same thing. So the culture is very the same. I thought that coming here is like, Lord, please bring me to a place where it's like Catholic, because I'm a close Catholic.
Yeah.
Philippines is the third largest country who is Catholic. I grew up in a parish named St. Francis as well. And when I arrived here, my place is in the St. Francis Parish. So it's like, Lord, you brought me to a place like St. Francis Parish.
Yeah.
And so I saw a lot of Filipinos. I thought that I will be going to a place where there's no Filipino, but no, there's a lot of Filipino. And the moment they saw you, like, oh, welcome to our house. So I thought there's no Filipinos in this area.
Yeah.
Because when I arrived here, going from LA, I thought that I was in Saudi Arabia.
So you flew into LA and then drove
We drove here.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's so hot, 120 degrees. And it was so dry.
Yeah.
I arrived here like 12 midnight here in my apartment. So dry.
Right, compared
Sand.
especially to the Philippines where it's like humid and
hot.
wet and like, you know.
You're going to sweat in there.
Yeah.
But here, it's dry.
Oh my God.
Super dry. My
blow
throat's
dryer.
like super dry.
At least there's one difference between the Philippines and here.
Oh yeah. But the moment that you enter the house, it's so cold because it's
Yeah.
centralized AC.
Yeah.
I didn't know that there's a lot of Filipino teachers here in Somerton, Arizona.
Because they were recruited from the Philippines or
Yes.
just coincidence? Oh, okay.
They were recruited from the Philippines. I don't want to go anywhere else.
Wow.
Because we only have one culture, which is Mexican American. Culture is like one, and you're teaching only one culture. And most of them, or one-fourth of them, were farmers, migrant. You feel like you're home, because in the Philippines, most of them are like farmers as well, or migrants.
Yeah.
And for them, education is very important, because they are the interpreters of their parents who can't speak English.
Oh, wow.
So they need to go to school.
Yeah.
So that they can help their parents sign their papers
Yeah.
if they need someone to interpret for them.
Wow.
So for them, education is very important.
Is it a deeper relationship that you're able to cultivate with your students because of what you're describing, this like singular culture, it's Mexican American, they are really reliant on the education that you're delivering to them, and then especially like the way that you're educating them about culture, about their heritage, about their history, and to have such an emotional, it sounds like you have such an emotional tie to wanting to cultivate this for them. I mean, does that make the relationships that you have with your students even richer and stronger?
Oh, yeah. We have some students who were migrants. A lot of them were, not a lot, like quarter of them were migrants. These kids doesn't know that their ancestors came from different places. So because of that, I also incorporate with them that why don't you ask your relatives and ask them, where did they come from? Like your nana, your tata, your tio and tia. And how does it relate to us with our education? Because here in the United States, this is a country of like a lot of immigrants.
Yeah.
We're a diverse culture. This is a country of diverse culture. And they were like, oh, as far as I know, my grandparents were born here and my parents were born here. Are you sure? Are you sure? Did you interview them? Did you ask them? Oh, no. After this interview, Miss Chavez, I didn't know that my grandparents came from that place.
So you have a project that they're meant to go back and interview their families.
Yes. Then they have to tell it to me, or they have to describe it in a storytelling way, that they have to go to an interview process, and then they will have a video in front of them. Of course, they only have their iPads, and they record their nana and their tata. Oh, I came from Salinas. I came from here.
There was people coming from Hanford, Fresno. These are areas by Delano because of the farm labor from Northern California. It's like, hey, I'm from there, or whatever. Oh yeah, my dad's he's working here during the season, and then they would go back. They would like move. That's what the Filipinos were doing before that.
Yeah.
So the early farm workers was the traveling around, chasing work.
And this is the thing that I think Lonnie and I share. When I grew up, I just felt so disconnected from my family. And like hearing these stories or learning about these stories, hearing other people's stories, just makes me feel so much more at peace and so much closer to my family. Is that something that you're seeing as well with the students?
Especially them having connections with their grandparents and about knowing about their ancestors helps a lot of them having built connections that when they go out of this community, they will still remember and realize that, hey, I have roots from that places.
That's something that I'm noticing, that as I'm going through this journey and sharing it on YouTube and sharing it with other people, like my parents are also starting to get more excited, more closer to their own sense of Filipino heritage as well, because when they immigrated here in the late 60s, I feel like they really had to cut themselves off psychologically, emotionally from the country because they didn't know when they could go back, especially during that time of history. It was in such turmoil. It also affected my relationship to the Philippines because I already felt that disconnection that they had. And seeing, as they're witnessing me go through this discovery process and journey, it's like they're getting excited again. And is that something that your students are also experiencing where they're like, oh yeah, my parents are suddenly, I don't know, it's like you can probably see it also in the movies that they're sharing, like the grandparents lighting up, the parents lighting up and going, oh yeah, here are these memories and these stories that I want to share with you.
Especially when I presented the video of Larry Itliong. They were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that there's a big improvement of their salary because our parents are having a salary right now from farm. And before they're only having like $1. And they had an increase of $1.12. And then they were like, oh, I didn't know. And then they were like telling me on the discussion that our parents are now having like $16 per hour. $16. Imagine how many years they fought for this. What years that we're talking about with Larry Leong and the way back then. And now it's not a big difference. And them working at night. They have to leave these kids at home because they have to work in the farm.
Tell me about how you introduced Larry Itliong. It being a predominantly Mexican-American school, he's Filipino. How do you introduce that, and then how do you tie it into Cesar Chavez?
I started first with Cesar Chavez because Cesar Chavez came from here, Yuma, Arizona, and it's a mind-blowing to all of the students. What? He was born here? And I'm like, yeah, that's why there's a lot of schools around us named Cesar Chavez, right? And some of these kids, the students that I have, doesn't know that their descendants are half Filipino, half Mexican.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what?
Yeah.
And they find this out when they interview their families?
Yes.
So that's common, Delano, Phoenix, where you have the two cultures living together because they lived and worked together.
Yeah, and there's so many similarities.
And that's why you see a lot
So
of
many
in
similarities.
Phoenix, like if you see them, they look Mexican. They're raised Chicano
They
and
are
everything.
now like Chicanos.
But they'll say they're mestizo. That's how they claim that Filipino
Correct.
heritage.
Yeah.
So you'll see people with mestizo hats and walking around. Like if I see a person, I'm like, oh man, your grandpa must have been a
Filipino.
Oh
You're
yeah,
like, oh,
my grandpa
yeah.
was this guy, and they're Chicano. They're raised in that culture.
Yeah.
So with me, I got to experience both sides because my dad in California is Filipino, and then my mom's family here is Mexican. So I got both.
So the students are fighting this out.
I was like, you guys know that back in the day, there's a camp here in Somerton, Filipino farmers, directly hired from the Philippines. And they have a camp here in Somerton. We didn't know that there's this camp here of Filipinos. And I was like telling them, you guys know the Burger King here in Somerton? They were like, yes. That's a former camp of Filipinos. Mexicans and Filipinos are having a chicken fight on that camp. They were like, we thought that it's just like sabong in Mexican. No, it's also Filipinos. And during their day offs on Sunday, they will play there and have their music in there because that's their day off of these farmers. During those day offs too, they will meet other Mexicans.
Yeah.
And that's the time that their culture will be mixed.
Yeah.
Mexicans and Filipinos. They're like, oh, we didn't know that. So that's the time that they realize, oh, that's why we have this lesson of Larry Itliong, because he's a Filipino farmer who fought for the Filipino farmer movement. He started that organization, and Cesar Chavez is the Mexican side. So they put together after how many years,
Yeah.
and they put up this organization to fight for the grape strike movement.
And then that's what the growers were using the race card. Once if the Filipinos would strike, the Mexicans, they'll pay them a little bit more to go break it. So that's why that movement is huge. They lost the power to try to break them at that point.
Because they were like good friends, right? Larry
Yeah.
and Cesar.
Cesar.
Dolores Puerto was part of AWOC, which is the union that the Filipinos were in.
Okay.
And then she went over to NFWA, the Cesar
With
Chavez.
Cesar Chavez.
When people mention that movement, Filipinos were organizing since Hawaii in the early 1920s. These guys are actually unionists. They're real unionists. So a lot of people don't see that. A lot of people think, oh, it's just a farm worker guy that did this. This guy was in other unions before Delano. And that's why he
Correct.
was recruited, because he was a good organizer.
Yeah.
He spoke a bunch of dialects.
Right.
So he was organizing in Northern California already with other Filipino organizers.
So then how do you share that? Do you use this book?
Yes.
And how did you come to this book?
I was on this mind that I want to share this story to the whole Arizona teachers. That's why I don't want to leave here, Somerton. That's my goal of putting this story and involve all teachers and let them know that, hey, we're teaching about migration, immigration, and we're teaching about Filipinos, but who are the people involved?
I've been looking for a teacher, and then when I connected with her, I was like, oh man, this one's gonna
Hit.
this one's gonna run with it and make something happen.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw her one time at it was when you won the award.
Wait, what award did you win?
First year teacher of the year.
First year teacher of Yuma. So I finally connected with
amazing.
somebody that has the avenues to get this story out.
When they finally created the Day for Larry Itliong in Phoenix, I have that proclamation. I asked Lonnie to give me the proclamation, wrote a letter
Yeah.
to Arizona Department of Education. We need to do something about this. As a social studies teacher here in Somerton and in Yuma, and you guys always want my input in the curriculum, let's put this curriculum
Yeah.
in Arizona. October of 2021.
Was it 21?
So this is really recent.
So that's the first time in Arizona history we have a Larry Itliong Day.
So there's Larry Itliong Day, and at the same time, simultaneously, you were able to get this into the curriculum. That was a great month.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Filipino American History Month.
Filipino American History Month. At the beginning of the moment that they proclaimed that in Phoenix and in Chandler, I wrote a letter already to Arizona Department of Education. We need to put this as a Filipino teacher, not just a Filipino teacher, but a social studies teacher. This is
Yeah.
part of history. Everything now is in Arizona Department of Education. They're using this curriculum
Yeah.
as part of our resources. And I was like, this is just the first step.
Yeah.
Our next step is to have this training to all social studies teachers around Arizona.
Yeah.
That this is part of our curriculum. This is part of our history.
It's American history. A lot of people don't realize that's American history. It's labor history.
Well, it's happening state by state, too. Like when I was in New York, they made an announcement that the curriculum was now officially in the New York education. And then also, I think in California, it's the same thing. Like those are also coming up.
They're very active in California
California
with
is
ethnic
very
studies
active.
and
Yeah.
stuff. You got representation like that. And see, that's kind of like what I like to see our next step here in Phoenix. We have no Filipino American representation.
There's a lot of teachers who actually communicated with me and asked me, hey, can we get an example or a sample book? Giving a sample book, which is actually good, but I want all students, most of the students, have this kind of book as well, so that they can see, oh, yeah, it's happening, or even just on their shelves, as part of their library, that they can read it about La Itliong and how it's connected with Cesar Chavez, how there's a Filipino community.
Yeah.
And Filipino farmers who started actually here in Arizona.
Can you share with me a little bit of what this is?
That's cool. I like it. The students made those?
Yeah.
And that's from reading the book?
Yeah. After reading the book, they have to share what they have learned about the story about La Itliong. And so they created a comic storyboard about La Itliong.
That's very important. The AWAC, that has to be mentioned every time you talk about the Filipino.
They said that, oh, we're not that good in drawing, but at least we have a little bit of what we shared.
Wow, they even drew that. The signs from Stockton. That have
Yeah.
No Filipinos allowed.
How did this start for you? Like this passion for teaching, is it something that comes from your family, or is your family, do you come from a lineage of lawyers, or is it or teachers or
Teachers, actually. Teachers. My aunts will tell me, oh, that's how you made a legacy, being a teacher. You put in their hearts, what have you left in their hearts when they grow up? And one day you will just see them, oh, I have now a lawyer. I have students who are now doctors, nurses, and I feel so old at my age. Because I started in the Philippines as a high school teacher.
Yeah.
And now they're like, I have a pilot, I have nurses and doctors. Now I feel like I'm so old.
That's it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next week. Thanks so much for watching. Paalam. Goodbye.